Journalism wins the Preakness and now moves on to the Belmont, setting up a showdown with Sovereignty. Let's discuss on the Win Play Show. Hi everyone, Matthew DeSantis here with NYRA Bets, and welcome to another episode of the Win Play Show where I cover all the topics in the sport of horse racing, dealing with horse racing, handicapping, betting, and the whole 9 yards. Listen, this week we are focused on obviously dissecting the Preakness, talking a little bit about that, looking ahead to the Belmont Stakes, talking about some other big performances over the weekend. Before we get to all that, I want to remind you to press that like button and subscribe to NYRA Bets YouTube today. Subscribing is entirely free of cost, just notifies you when new videos drop on the channel, whether those are race previews, full card analyses, handicapping and betting tutorials, specialty programs, and so much more. We got you covered for Belmont. We got you covered for Saratoga. We got you covered for Keeneland in the fall. We got you covered for Breeders' Cup. We got you covered all year round, folks. So like I said, make sure to press that like and subscribe button today. Well, like I said, welcome to the Win Play Show. And I think, listen, there's a lot to dissect from what we saw over the last week. But I think we have to start with, obviously, the headline, journalism. And I don't even say that with any pun intended. But the headline is journalism's performance in the Preakness Stakes, what we took out of it, what we learned from it, what we learned from some of the other performances we saw in the Preakness, etc. Quite frankly, my friends, there are very few words you can use to describe what journalism did in that Preakness. There are a lot of words you can use to describe Umberto Rispoli's ride. We'll talk about that in a little bit. There's a lot of words you can use to describe Gosger's, I think, very gutty performance up on the front end in only his fourth career start. There's a lot of words you can use to describe Pimlico rating the turf as good at one point. But journalism, wow. It is hard not to be hyperbolic in moments like that. It is hard not to think back to a Fleet Alex 20 years earlier, going down to his knees because Scrappy T blew the turn. And it is hard not to, like I said, maybe be a little too lofty in your praise of journalism. But that effort in the home stretch, getting bumped around by goal-oriented, and we'll get to the dynamics of that because I don't think it's all on goal-oriented by any stretch. And seeing how he not only got through it, but responded. And the finish was just thrilling as too mundane of a word. It was just awe-inspiring. It was spine-tingling. It was jaw-dropping. It was everything you want to see out of a great horse race, and it had it. Obviously, we did the instant reaction video on YouTube. You can check it out, myself and Kaylee Shapiro. And we recorded that just for context. Oh, gosh, probably 20 minutes after the race was over. And we had watched, I think, 2 replays, maybe one. And maybe I think we'd seen one. Obviously, we watched it live. And then we saw a replay. And I think we saw maybe the stretch run a couple of times. But we didn't see the whole race. I think we just watched the whole race once. And a couple of things really stick out to you. First, journalism didn't get the best trip early on. Michael McCarthy has wanted this horse to lay much closer to the pace in both the Derby and then the Preakness. He mentioned leading up to the Preakness that he was disappointed the horse was sitting 10th in the Derby. I thought that was kind of where he would be sitting, but he wanted to be closer. And it was pretty obvious that he wanted to be a little bit closer early in this race, but American Promise really held his line, and that's something we'll get back to in a second. But American Promise, breaking from the 3-post, really held his line and was a little bit more aggressive, and it kind of forced journalism a little further back maybe than Rispoli wanted him. And you could tell that he was out of the bridle on the backstretch. He was really getting after him. And I remember when he was getting after him on the backstretch, I looked at Kaylee, and who I was watching the race with, and my other colleague, Hillary Hutchinson, and looked at the two of them. And I said, he's done. He doesn't have it today. And all of a sudden, he picks up the bridle. Rispoli decides to go inside, which we'll get to in a second. He picks up the bridle, and then you see what ends up happening. I mean, it just was stunning to see the effort that he put in there at the end. But in some ways, it was very reminiscent, reminded me a little bit of the Fountain of Youth effort that we saw from Sovereignty this year. Now, not in terms of, obviously, the finish. That is historic, okay? There's very few comparisons other than a Fleet Alex. And obviously, it was a different dynamic. A Fleet Alex going down to his knees, journalism getting punched inside. Very different dynamics, admittedly, but very similar in terms of a horse facing that sort of physical distress and race distress that can often sink their chances of winning. And not only seeing both of them win, but then win impressively in different dynamics. But nevertheless, It reminded me of Sovereignty's Fountain of Youth in that I remember in that race, Junior was kind of scrubbing at Sovereignty on the backstretch, really kind of getting after him a little bit. And I had a very similar thought, which is, well, the horse is coming off the layoff, might not have it today. And I thought the same thing with Journalism. I go, well, maybe the 2 weeks got him. Who knows? Maybe he's just not going to respond as well as we'd hoped. And Journalism, same thing happened with Sovereignty. All of a sudden around the turn, the ears prick up, and here we go. And Sovereignty makes that big run and catches River Thames at the wire. And Journalism obviously then makes this big move. And people are going to focus on the ride, and they should. Rispoli got him to save ground in that first turn, which was important, I thought. And you could tell by the drone shot going down the backstretch, there was a moment where Rispoli drifted the horse out a path or two, and you could tell he was contemplating going the overland route. He was contemplating just going wide, keeping the horse clear. And kind of at the last second, you could see, nope, we're gonna angle inside. He goes inside instead. And as he's going inside, I'm thinking to myself, the rail's got to open up. It's got to open up. Somebody's got to move. Somebody's got to move, because there's just, it was very obvious. There was no room. There was no room. Goal-oriented had his line. And Clever Again was right on the rail. And in 99% of dirt races in North America, the rail opens up because nobody knows how to protect the rail or is interested in protecting the rail anymore. And he assumed, hey, this rail is going to open up. And the same thing's true in turf racing as well. Maggie Wolfendale, I thought, made a great point that he rides Journalism a little bit the way he rides a turf horse. And Umberto Rispoli is a great turf jockey, but it's not surprising that he rides dirt horses kind of the way he rides turf horses. And he kind of assumed that rail was going to open up, or that goal-oriented was going to go out of path, and he was going to get that shot. And Jose held the rail on Clever Again, who was starting to go back and starting to back up a little bit after being up in the lead. Gosger gets ahead of everybody. I mean, Gosger, it was almost like Gosger got ahead of a crash in NASCAR to some extent, where he kind of got clear and then all hell broke loose behind him. And so he's getting ahead, and goal-oriented has his line. Now, there's elbowing from Flavien. There's elbowing. They're trading paint. We're going to continue this NASCAR analogy, which I don't know if that's a good idea or not. But if we continue with that, he's absolutely kind of trading paint, rubbing elbows with him. But Rispoli makes a hole where there really isn't one. And Prat had every right to hold the line. He had every right to hold his space. And he chose, I'm staying right on it. And it was definitely some race riding. And that's, there are some people who don't like it. I get it. But you watch old races, and there's a lot of that. And, I know we legislated some of that out of the sport, but it was it was a lot of race riding. It was a scary moment. But when Journalism makes contact with, and Flavien talked about this afterwards, when Journalism makes contact with goal-oriented kind of hip and backside, the horse is naturally going to jerk in. And that's exactly what happened. And then that causes the chain reaction with then bumping into Journalism, who bumps into Clever Again, who gets bumped into the rail and has to take up. And at that point, Jose just eases him home. Fortunately, everybody's okay. All right. That's the most important thing. Horses, jockeys, everybody's all right. But it was scary, and it was a little dangerous. And I know initially people thought Flavien, was in the wrong. I didn't think Flavien was in the wrong. I think he held his line. And, I know Kaylee disagrees with me a little bit. I talked to her about this after the race. She thought it was a little bit more on Flavien. I think it's a little bit more on Rispoli. Ultimately, the decision, nobody's getting anything taken down. But once Journalism gets through there's something else remarkable that happens, which is he and Sandman are now in the clear. Okay. Now, he had just gotten out of a mess, and it had his momentum at least partially impeded by that collision. Sandman's been in the clear this whole time, and he's making a wide move. And I'm reminded of a great line in the movie The Usual Suspects when Kevin Spacey's character, Verbal Kint, and spoilers, who eventually is Kaiser Sose. But Kevin, if you haven't watched The Usual Suspects yet, I'm sorry. But Kevin Spacey's character is talking about Kaiser Sose, and he uses the line, he goes, and then he showed these men of will what will really was. And I felt that way a little bit about Journalism and Sandman. And then he showed a closer what closing really was. Because you can talk about closing, and when you have Cornucopian and Speed King dueling each other into submission on the front end, everybody looks like a superstar. But there's closing and there's closing. And journalism had a deadline to meet, and he got there. And he closed in a way that made Sandman look pedestrian at best. And Sandman ran a much better race than I thought, to be clear, because I can be critical of that horse, and I'm often critical of him, not because of him as much as the betting public over betting him and him just not being good value and not being a horse I'm interested in using. And I also think he's a typical Tapit. He's a little quirky and he's a little goofy, and he's far from a finished product. And we see this after the race. Now Mark Casse talking about putting blinkers on potentially and him taking a little bit of time off. So we'll see. But nevertheless, those two are on even terms. Sandman's actually a little bit ahead. And by the time they hit the wire, journalism's about 5 lengths ahead of Sandman, or maybe 4 lengths ahead of Sandman. I mean, what he did in that stretch was just put away a horse that's supposed to be this great closer and track down a horse that inherited a lead. I shouldn't say inherited. He got to the lead and then had the benefit of everybody behind him facing trouble. And Gosger was so far clear of the field and still got tracked down by journalism. Now, I think people are a little unfair to Gosger. A, it's his 4th career start. B, he improved 10 Beyer speed figure points from an 87 to a 97 off his last effort in winning the Lexington. And C, he was going to win that race if it wasn't for journalism. Sandman was making up some ground on him for sure, but not that much ground on him. He still was, like I said, 4 or 5 lengths clear of Sandman. So it wasn't like he was in any harm of getting caught by anybody else other than potentially the best horse in his crop or the second best horse if you think Sovereignty is better. But I mean, 1A and 1B. I mean, so incredible performance. But listen, this is one of the reasons why I was in the Derby initially trying to beat journalism, because Grande was my top pick. And then he scratched. So maybe he saved me the embarrassment of having a horse, come in last. Who knows? But nevertheless, I kind of scratched into journalism as my top choice. But my hesitation with journalism from day one, and I shouldn't say from day one, but from really the Los Al Futurity on was, do you really trust a turf rider on this horse? And I don't know. Rispoli he's on one hand, I could understand how somebody goes, wow, what remarkable composure, what a great ride. On another hand, you go, what are you doing? You have the best horse. Just keep him out of trouble and ride him like the best horse. And it's easy to say he wasn't traveling well on the backs of the stretch. So Rispoli's trying to kind of get to him and try to get him into the bridle and the whole 9 yards. It's easy to criticize. I understand that. But nevertheless, it was an effort where he got him in trouble in the Santa Anita Derby in a 5-horse race somehow. He got him in trouble in the Preakness, that's for sure. I don't think the ride in the Derby was that bad. I thought the ride in the Derby was fine. I know some people were critical of it. I just thought Junior gave a better ride to Sovereignty, and Sovereignty, heads up, might be a better horse. We're going to find that out in a couple of weeks. That's for sure. Because, friends, we got a great Belmont Stakes coming up. We got journalism and we got Sovereignty. And then, oh, by the way, we got Baeza coming in from California, who was 3rd in the Derby and was closing like a freight train there at the end. So we got the showdown. Journalism, in all likelihood, is going to be running on 3 weeks rest and running his 3rd race in 5 weeks. Sovereignty took the more maybe strategic approach, which is run in the Derby, win that, skip the Preakness. We're going to the Belmont. We're now going to come in fresh. We're going to come in on a regular racing cycle of about 4 or 5 weeks, 5 weeks in this particular case, off, and we're going to be ready to roll. And now we're going to see. And Baeza also coming in fresh, 5 weeks rest. All right. So those two are coming in fresh, facing journalism, who just had one of the more sensational efforts that you'll see in the Breeders' Cup or in the Preakness. Now, you could also look at journalism and go, he's gotten slower now. The last couple, he ran that 108 in the 2-back or 3-back, I should say. He ran a 102 in the Santa Anita Derby, and he ran a 102 in the Kentucky Derby, and then he ran a 98 in the Preakness. It's hard to assign too much value to that Preakness number. You want to give it some credence, obviously. A horse like Gosger got a 97. I think that's very indicative of what he ran. But considering the trouble journalism had, it's hard to really put all of that number on him, because David Aragona shared this online. Some of the metrics that you looked at in terms of how he closed that last 16th of a mile, his stride length, that last 16th of a mile, and that last furlong was absolutely incredible compared to the rest of the field. Longer stride, faster fractions. It was an incredible effort from him. And so, yes, the 98 tells part of the story, but not the whole story, I don't think. So I thought that was a big effort. Can't wait to see what some of the other industry standard figure makers come back with for their respective standards and so forth. But listen, now we look ahead to the Belmont. And yes, Sovereignty skipped the Preakness, and that was disappointing in terms of, there's not a triple crown on the line, but man alive, now we could get a potential showdown between the Derby and the Preakness winner, the Derby runner-up, of course, and the Derby third-place finisher in Baeza. And there's some other horses that are pretty interesting in that race as well. But Sovereignty worked out on Saturday, on Preakness Day. And Belmont was quoted as saying, he needed to get out and do something. He was a little restless, needed to get out, wanted to get out. I saw a tweet from Nick Tamero, and I know a lot of people who know Nick, and I know a lot of people who know him who admire him and like him a lot. I've never met him. I just know his morning lines at Keeneland. I will say that without comment, because he made a tweet that said, quoted Belmont and said, "I'm just leaving this up here without comment," with the insinuation of the horse is restless after 2 weeks. Maybe you shouldn't run him in the Preakness. There's a big difference. And I don't know how much Nick works out. God knows I don't work out as much as I should. There's a big difference from me going on a half-mile run on the boardwalk and me running the New York City Marathon. And so getting a 4-furlong breeze in 49 and change, which is what Sovereignty did, is a hell of a lot different than running a classic race, going a mile and 3/16 and being a part of that situation. So Belmont's doing right by this horse. Belmont has a long-term strategy. And it's pretty obvious that he has sold Godolphin on a long-term strategy. That is much more than we're going to win the Preakness. It is the Belmont, it is the Travers, it is the Breeders' Cup. That is the goal for these horses. And Mike Rapoli said something very interesting, and Mike says a lot of interesting things, but he said something very interesting about, sometimes that, 3 races in 5 weeks can have a lingering effect later in the year on a horse. And I think Belmont's very cognizant of that he wants this horse. Could he have done 3 races in 5 weeks? Sure. Would it have tired him out potentially for the Travers, for the Breeders' Cup? Maybe so. He doesn't want that. He wants this horse to win those races. Godolphin wants to win those races. All right. So this is what you're seeing. And this is the decision that was made. And so, listen, I don't begrudge the man for the decision that he made. He had every right to do it. And he's a Hall of Fame trainer, and he trained one of the great horses of the last 35 years in terms of Cigar. And he ran Cigar a lot. But he also knows what the horse is and what the horse isn't. He also has a long-term strategy there. So, again, I don't begrudge him for that. And it goes back to a point that I made a few weeks ago, and I saw David Aragona kind of echo this point this past week. And it is, if you make the sport about the Triple Crown, then you're going to fret about the Triple Crown. And that is the problem that we have in horse racing, is we've made the entire sport about 3 races for 3-year-old horses on the dirt. And that is a fraction, a very small fraction of what this sport is. But if you make it all about that, if that's how you market your entire sport, then when something goes awry, or when somebody decides to skip, or when something different happens, then it seems cataclysmic. It seems catastrophic. It shouldn't be, but it seems that way. The Breeders' Cup is the pinnacle of our sport. That is the truth. That's why it's called the Breeders' Cup. It is the pinnacle of our sport. All right. That is how we should be marketing the sport. The races leading up to the Breeders' Cup is how we should be marketing the sport. Is the Triple Crown a part of that? Absolutely. Is the Triple Crown always going to have a very special place in American culture? Absolutely, as it should. But if you put all your eggs in that basket, then that's what's going to happen. We had 2 Triple Crown winners in 2015 and 2018. We're still where we are as a sport right now. So Faro and Justify didn't save the sport by any stretch of the imagination. So just simply having a Triple Crown on the line isn't going to save the sport. So getting upset with Belmont and Sovereignty for that just seems very foolish, in my opinion. Very short-sighted, I guess. I shouldn't say foolish. Maybe just short-sighted. But this is, like I said, this is where we are. But what we are is we have a hell of a matchup. We also have a great matchup in the Met Mile. I just mentioned the Breeders' Cup. I'm going to say it right now. I think the Met Mile, the way that field is shaping up, could be the best non-Breeders' Cup race we see all year. It could be. It could be. Maybe some of the turf races later this year, if Appleby or O'Brien bring over some of those horses, could be interesting. But man alive, that Bet Mile is going to be something. You got White Abarrio and you got Fierceness. You got two champions facing off against each other. You don't get that very often. You got a 2-year-old champion and an older champion facing off against each other. You have a horse like Nysos, who I think second off the layoff is going to be real ready to roll in that race for Bob Baffert. You got a horse like Just a Touch. Friends, I saw him at Keeneland this spring. My God, that horse was moving like a machine. And that horse looked like a different breed out there compared. Now, it was against Allowance Company. Admittedly, he needs to step up. This will be his third race back from a long layoff. But man alive, does he look ready to roll. And that's a good-looking horse. And then you have everybody else in that race. I mean, you have some really nice, you have Raging Torrent, who's coming over from winning in Dubai. You have some big-time horses running in that race. Maybe Bookham Dano, maybe a horse like Banishing, who, what has that horse done wrong? That horse has done very little wrong over the last several months for David Jacobson. So it's going to be a jam-packed race. I'll tell you that. That's going to be one of the best races we see all year. I can't wait to see that one. Got the news that Locked is going to be pointing towards the Suburban, so we'll see about that. So listen, a lot of great stuff. But going back to Pimlico last weekend, obviously the final weekend at Old Hilltop, the way it is now, the grandstands are going to be demolished and raised up again and rebuilt, very similar to what was happened up here with Belmont Park. And so we're going to see the Preakness take place at Laurel Park next year. And I've been to Pimlico a bunch of times. It's an interesting track. It's not the greatest for the paddock experience. I hope they end up, developing a better paddock experience there, because I think it really could be a beautiful place. We'll see. But excited for the Maryland Horsemen, though, more than anything else. This project is finally going to get underway. But they sent Old Hilltop out in style, that's for sure. I do think from a betting standpoint, I have to be honest, it was a little disappointing to see the way the turf was rated on the day. It was rated as good to start Saturday. There's no way that turf was good. Not in the early races at the very least. That was playing soft. I wouldn't go as far as saying yielding, but that was playing soft. And again, as a bettor, you see a turf course that's rated good. You go, okay, there's a little moisture in it. That course was playing like much more moisture was in that course than what they were rating it. So that's the second year in a row now. Last year, if you remember, they rated the track a certain way, and it was not a certain way. They even rated the main track as good at one point this year, and it really looked muddy on Saturday. So, I don't love that as a bettor. Again, you want full transparency. You want to see what the conditions are so that you can make the best decisions, handicapping and betting, that you possibly can. So obviously not what you wanted to see there, but fortunately everybody ran really well. And I did have to chuckle because it was so predictable. And I have the receipts, so I can attest to this. Irad Ortiz Jr. on Saturday, after I think the fourth turf race, said, it's really hard to make up ground on the turf today. And I screenshotted that tweet and I sent it to my colleagues and I said, be prepared for pace meltdowns on all subsequent turf races. And that is exactly what happened. Because when a turf course is playing a certain way where nobody's making up ground, what happens is everybody decides we have to get to the lead. And then what happens is, whoops, everybody goes too fast early and suddenly everybody's winning from coming off the pace. And so that is kind of, again, what you saw happen. Now, some very good turf horses won. A horse like Whitty won that sprint that was really thrilling. And you had a horse like Reagan's Wit, who's a really nice horse for Cherie DeVoe win. So you had some very predictable winners to some extent, but it was surprising. It just cracked me up that I was like, oh, you really want to be forward on this turf course. Nobody's making up ground. And then the next three races, everybody makes up ground. But again, it's all pace makes the race, right? Pretty straightforward. So, some interesting other performances. Obviously, you saw a horse like Varney for Bob Baffert win on the undercard. That's a potentially pretty interesting horse, earned a mid-80s buyer speed figure for that effort. You saw a horse Crudo win the Sir Barton in gate to wire fashion. The figure came back light on that horse, so I'm a little interested to see where he goes next, because I don't know if the Belmont Stakes is the right step, but I'm going to get to that in a moment, where maybe it is the right step because the way that the pace dynamic plays out, it might favor a horse like Crudo, who's got great early speed. He's also the full sibling to Awesome Result, who's an amazing Japanese horse and who is, I think, 8 for 9 now, career winning. So, grade 1 winner over there. So has the pedigree and goes long. And, so it's got the pedigree there to go much longer. So you saw some of those performances there. Like I said, Witty, Reagan's Wit, I thought both looked really good in their respective turf efforts as well. Margie's Intention wins the Black-Eyed Susan the day before. Tough beat if you liked the second place horse. I'm blanking on the Paris Lily. That's what I knew. If I just kept talking, it would come to me eventually. That was my top pick in the race too. Just got nabbed at the wire by Margie's Intention. But listen, that race, nobody came out of that race particularly fast. I think you saw an 82 buyer speed figure is the winning number for Margie's Intention. Hard to think that she's going to be competing with a horse like Good Cheer, or even a horse like, Quiet Side on her best day, or some of these other horses that have run in the 90s, pretty consistently, or at least have posted multiple 90 plus buyer speed figures during their 3-year-old campaign. So we'll see. But, certainly, hey, Louisiana bred on a day where you've had 3 Pennsylvania breds, you had Texas bred, you had in a weekend where you had a Texas bred as well, and then a Louisiana bred. So it's very cool to see the smaller state bred programs doing very well at Pimlico on Black-Eyed Susan and Preakness Day. Now we turn the page to the Belmont, which is coming up. And like I said, we're going to have a lot of content. Kaylee and I are going to do an early Belmont Stakes preview. We're going to have Preakness Spotlight or Belmont Stakes Spotlight videos up there. We're going to have some Met Mile previews as well, because that race is going to be massive. We're going to have a lot of people on the channel helping us out with this. We're going to have trainers. We're going to have jockeys. We're going to have owners talking to us about some of this stuff. So it's going to be a lot of fun. But just quickly, you look ahead at the Belmont and you go, Sovereignty. Okay. You go journalism. All right. Baeza. All right. Hill Road, who won the Peter Pan. Okay. Not a leader in the group, right? Closer. You got Hill Road and Sovereignty are closers. You got mid-pack runners like Baeza and journalism. I think both can show good speed, can track the pace, but they're not horses that go up on the front end. Gosger, maybe. Gosger, if nobody else goes, maybe Gosger finds himself up in the lead. Rodriguez is the big X factor for Bob Baffert. This is a horse that has well-documented foot issues, kept him out of the Derby, kept him out of the Preakness. Now the intent is that he's going to go to the Belmont. We'll see. I mean, he might hold the dubious distinction of pre-scratching out of all 3 Triple Crown races this year, which is not a distinction I think the horse or the connections want to hold. So we'll see whether or not he's able to do it. But Rodriguez would be a very dangerous horse if he runs and if he's 100%, because there's not a lot of other speed signed on in this race. McAfee, who also doesn't have great speed, is going to the Ohio Derby. And the other horses coming out of the Peter Pan are all going to be cutting back in distance or just aren't quite at that level yet. So, you also have a horse like Burnham Square who's going to the Matt Winn, if I'm not mistaken. So you have a couple of horses, like I said, who are nice Derby horses, but just, maybe a cut below, and they're pointed elsewhere. They're going to the Matt Winn. They're going to the Ohio Derby. They're doing that Midwestern Derby, circuit this summer. And that's great. I love those types of horses. And it should be a lot of fun. I believe Cole Battle is going to the Matt Winn as well. So, that's shaping up to be a nice race with Burnham Square and Cole Battle. So that'll be a fun race. But, when you look at the Belmont, there's not a lot of speed in this race. And I wonder, depending on how Rodriguez is in terms of health, I wonder if other trainers take a look at that. And this is why maybe Pletcher does step a horse like Crudo up maybe too soon. But he looks at this and goes, hey, there's no other speed in this race. This horse gets out there and goes. Maybe nobody catches him, especially with the Belmont Stakes being 1.25 miles this year because it's at Saratoga. It's always an asterisk that I think you have to mention when you're handicapping. Whether you want to consider it the Triple Crown, Test of Champions, the whole 9 yards, I will let you all litigate that in the comments. But from a handicapping perspective, it's different. And one of the ways it's different, we just saw last year. In the previous 11 runnings of the Belmont Stakes, going back to 2013, only one horse had gone gate to wire to win the Belmont. Last year, Dornick did it and was able to go gate to wire. And so, that idea of being able to go gate to wire, I think, is much more feasible at 1.25 miles as opposed to 1.5 miles. And, so the winning trip might look a little bit different depending on who ends up showing up, what the pace dynamics end up being. But like I said, an absolutely thrilling weekend of racing coming up at Saratoga. Get your tickets if you haven't already. It is going to be, it'll be packed, but it'll be a fantastic weekend. some great racing beginning to end. The Acorn, good cheer coming back. That's going to be a lot of fun. Can't wait to see her. You got the Woody Stevens, you got the Met Mile, you got all of those great turf races. So really excited for all of that. Chad's got a bunch of turf horses that are rare to go. Cherie's going to come up with a couple. You got Carl Spackler and She Feels Pretty, who are more than looks, I should say, who are going to, square off. Or is it She Feels Pretty? Yeah, She Feels Pretty. Who are going to square off. And no, it's got to be more than looks. Yeah. Anyway, now I'm getting confused because, this is what happens when you just do stuff off the top of your head without notes. But it's going to be a great weekend, one way or the other. Listen, we got a lot of content coming for you this week. Like I said, we got an early Belmont Stakes preview. We'll have Captain the Card for the Saturday Belmont at the Big A card, and which has the Paradise Creek Stakes in, if I'm not mistaken. So that's going to be a lot of fun. It's going to be a lot of just great racing up and down. So can't wait for it. So make sure to press that like and subscribe button on NYRA Bets. For Matthew DeSantis, wishing you a great and profitable day at the races, and reminding you, friends, it's now post time.